The dust-laden winds of Bitterroot Valley, Montana, carried away the last of Morgan Quinn's hopes as he stared at the empty safe, his calloused fingers gripping the edge of the steel box that once held the culmination of 3 years' hard work. The gold was gone, all of it, along with his business partner, Leland Davis, who had disappeared in the night without so much as a goodbye. "Damn you, Leland," Morgan whispered, his voice breaking as he slammed the safe door shut. The sound echoed through his modest cabin, a painful reminder of how empty his future had become. It was 1887, and Morgan had put everything into their mining venture. The two men had struck a modest gold deposit in the hills above the valley, working tirelessly to extract enough to establish a proper ranch. The dream had been tantalizingly close, the land picked out, the cattle arrangements made before Leland's betrayal had snatched it all away. A soft knock at the cabin door pulled Morgan from his dark thoughts. Straightening his worn leather vest, he ran a hand through his sandy brown hair and crossed the room in 3 long strides. Standing on his porch was Tessa Ainsley, the schoolteacher who'd arrived in Bitterroot 6 months prior. Her auburn hair was neatly pinned beneath a modest hat, her green eyes filled with concern. At 26, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that commanded respect from even the roughest men in town. "Mr. Quinn," she said, her voice soft yet steady, "I heard about what happened." "May I come in?" Morgan hesitated, embarrassment coloring his features. News traveled fast in small towns, and the last thing he wanted was pity, but something in her expression, determination rather than sympathy, made him step aside. "Not much to see, Miss Ainsley." Just the aftermath of a fool's trust. Tessa entered, removing her gloves as she surveyed the modest one-room cabin. Her gaze fell on the open safe, then returned to Morgan's face. "I don't think trusting someone makes you a fool, Mr. Quinn. The foolishness belongs to the man who betrayed that trust." She placed her satchel on the table. "I've brought something that might help." Morgan watched as she withdrew a small leather-bound book, placing it beside a stack of papers. "What's that supposed to be?" he asked, his voice rough with fatigue. "Ledgers," Tessa replied, opening the book to reveal neat columns of numbers. "Before I came to Montana, I kept books for my father's mercantile in Pennsylvania. I thought perhaps I could help you determine exactly what you have left." Morgan stared at her, confusion evident in his blue eyes. "Why would you do that, Miss Ainsley? You barely know me." Tessa met his gaze unflinchingly. "Because everyone deserves a second chance, Mr. Quinn, even when others have stolen the first." The next morning found Morgan and Tessa sitting at his rough-hewn table, papers spread before them like a map of misfortune. The autumn sun slanted through dusty windows as they calculated his remaining assets. "So that's it," Morgan said, leaning back in his chair. $23 to my name, a played-out claim, and a horse that's seen better days." He laughed without humor. "Not exactly a promising start." Tessa made a final notation in her ledger. "You also have your skills, Mr. Quinn. I've heard you're quite adept with horses. And you own this cabin and the land it sits on, free and clear." Morgan rubbed his jaw, the stubble of several days catching on his calloused palm. "What good is that? The dream was the ranch. Leland and I had plans to build something that would last." "Then build something else," Tessa said simply. "The dream wasn't Leland's, it was yours. He merely borrowed it for a time." Morgan studied her face, searching for the pity he'd expected, but finding only practical determination. "You make it sound so straightforward, Miss Ainsley." "Nothing worthwhile is straightforward, Mr. Quinn, but it is possible." She closed the ledger with a gentle thump. "The question is whether you're willing to try again." Before he could respond, the cabin door burst open. Hiram Potter, the town blacksmith, stood there panting, his massive frame filling the doorway. "Morgan, there's trouble at the Sullivan place. Their stallion broke loose and is threatening to trample anyone who comes near. Gored poor Sullivan in the leg already." Morgan was on his feet instantly. "I'll saddle up." "I'll come too," Tessa said, gathering her things. Both men looked at her in surprise. "Miss Ainsley, this is dangerous work," Morgan began. "I grew up around horses, Mr. Quinn, and Mrs. Sullivan might need assistance with her husband's injury." Her tone brooked no argument as she headed for the door. As they rode toward the Sullivan farm, Morgan glanced at Tessa, noting how confidently she sat astride her mare. The schoolteacher was revealing unexpected layers, and despite his circumstances, he found himself intrigued. The scene at the Sullivan farm was chaos. The massive black stallion had cornered several farmhands against the barn, while James Sullivan lay on the ground nearby, clutching his bloodied leg as his wife tried to stem the bleeding. "Take care of Sullivan," Morgan told Tessa as he dismounted. "I'll handle the horse." Without waiting for a response, he approached the stallion carefully, speaking in low, soothing tones. The animal's eyes rolled wildly, nostrils flaring with each agitated breath. "Easy now," Morgan murmured, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Nobody's going to hurt you." It took nearly an hour of patient coaxing, but eventually, Morgan had a lead rope around the stallion's neck, the animal now docile under his calm handling. When he led the horse back to the paddock, he found Tessa kneeling beside Sullivan, who looked pale but conscious. She'd fashioned a proper bandage and was giving instructions to Mrs. Sullivan about caring for the wound. "That's quite a gift you have with horses," she said as Morgan approached. "I've never seen anything like it." Morgan shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just experience, nothing special." "Mr. Quinn," Tessa said firmly, "false modesty serves no one. You have a rare skill, one that could be the foundation of something new." As they rode back to town, Sullivan's grateful thanks and a modest payment of $5 in Morgan's pocket, an idea began to take shape. "You know," Morgan said slowly, "before I came west, I worked with a man who trained horses for wealthy families back east. Always thought I could do something similar if given the chance." Tessa's eyes brightened. "There's your answer. The ranchers around here are always looking for well-trained horses, and with your skill, it would take time, money for stock. Start small," she suggested. 1 or 2 horses. "Build your reputation." For the first time since discovering Leland's betrayal, Morgan felt a flicker of possibility. "Why are you doing this, Miss Ainsley? Helping a man you hardly know?" Tessa was quiet for a long moment, her eyes on the trail ahead. "When I first arrived here, I was running from something. Everyone deserves the chance to rebuild." The words hung between them, an offered confidence that Morgan recognized for the gift it was. He nodded, not pressing for details she wasn't ready to share. Over the next several weeks, a tentative partnership formed between them. During the day, Tessa taught at the small schoolhouse in town. Evenings and weekends, she helped Morgan draft plans for his new venture, Quinn horse training. Word of Morgan's skill with the Sullivan stallion had spread, and soon small jobs came his way breaking wild horses for local farmers, training mounts for the stage coach line. Each success brought a few more dollars and, more importantly, a growing reputation. Tessa's contribution went beyond bookkeeping. She wrote advertisements for the territorial newspaper, designed a proper business contract, and even convinced the bank manager to extend Morgan a small loan enough to purchase 2 promising yearlings from a breeder passing through. "You're quite the business partner," Morgan observed one evening as they worked by lamplight in his cabin, which was gradually transforming into a more comfortable home. Tessa looked up from the letter she was drafting to a horse breeder in Wyoming. Partner. The word hung between them, weighted with meaning after Leland's betrayal. "I meant, that is." Morgan fumbled for words, suddenly aware of how much he'd come to depend on her. "I understand," Tessa said softly, "and I'm honored you would use that word after what happened." Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the air between them, something neither was ready to name. The first real test of their fledgling business came in early December when Colonel Richardson, a wealthy rancher from the next county, brought a magnificent but unruly Arabian mare to Morgan. "Paid a fortune for her bloodlines," the colonel explained, watching the horse prance nervously around Morgan's newly constructed corral. "But she's wilder than a mountain cat. No one can ride her." Morgan studied the mare's movements, noting her intelligent eyes and proud carriage. "She's not wild, Colonel. She's spirited. There's a difference." "Can you train her or not, Quinn?" "I need her ready for my daughter's 18th birthday in February. I'll pay double your usual fee if you succeed." The sum the colonel named would solve many of their financial problems, but Morgan knew better than to rush training. "I'll do my best, sir, but I won't promise what I can't deliver. Horses have their own timetables." After the colonel departed, Tessa approached the fence. "Can you do it?" Morgan watched the Arabian toss her head defiantly. "Yes," he said with quiet confidence, "but it won't be easy." The mare named Duchess by her owner tested every skill Morgan possessed. For the first week, she wouldn't allow him within 10 feet without rearing or bolting. Progress came in tiny increments. A moment of stillness, a curious approach, the first tentative acceptance of an apple from his hand. Tessa often sat on the fence during these sessions, observing with keen interest. One particularly challenging day, as Morgan returned to the cabin tired and frustrated, she surprised him with a book. "What's this?" he asked, turning the leather-bound volume in his hands. "A horse training method from Spain. I wrote to my uncle in Philadelphia who has connections with importers." "He sent this," she hesitated. "I hope you don't mind the interference." Morgan leafed through the book with its detailed illustrations and techniques he'd never encountered. "Mind, Tessa, this could be exactly what I need." It was the first time he'd used her given name. The intimacy of it colored her cheeks, but she didn't correct him. Incorporating the Spanish methods with his own techniques, Morgan made breakthrough progress with Duchess. By mid-January, he was riding her daily, gradually introducing her to the commands and postures the colonel's daughter would need. Their business reputation grew. 2 more clients brought horses for training, and Morgan hired young Tommy Wilson, a 16-year-old orphan with a natural way with animals, as an assistant. One evening, as Morgan returned from exercising Duchess, he found Tessa waiting by the corral. Snow dusted her woolen coat and her breath formed clouds in the crisp air. "You've worked miracles with her," she observed as Morgan removed the mare's tack. "No miracles, just patience and understanding." He ran a brush along Duchess's gleaming coat. "All creatures want the same things: safety, respect, clear expectations." "Is that all they want?" Tessa asked, her voice softening. Morgan's hand stilled on the horse's flank. He looked up to find Tessa watching him, something unspoken in her eyes. "No," he said quietly, "not all." The moment stretched between them, full of possibility, until Duchess nudged Morgan's shoulder impatiently. The spell broken, Tessa stepped back. "I should go, it's getting late." "Tessa," Morgan called as she turned to leave. "There's a dance at the town hall Saturday next. Would you consider accompanying me?" Her smile bloomed slow and sweet. "I would be delighted, Morgan." The night of the dance transformed Bitterroot's modest town hall into a haven of warmth and music. Lanterns cast golden light across the wooden floor where couples twirled to the fiddle and piano. Morgan, wearing his best shirt and freshly polished boots, waited nervously by the entrance. When Tessa appeared, he barely recognized her. Gone was the practical schoolteacher. In her place stood a woman in a deep blue dress that caught the light as she moved. Her hair, usually confined in a severe bun, fell in soft waves around her shoulders. "You look." Morgan searched for words adequate to the vision before him. "Beautiful doesn't begin to cover it." Tessa's smile was shy but pleased. "You clean up rather nicely yourself, Mr. Quinn." Inside, they joined the community in celebration of nothing more special than a Saturday night in winter. Morgan, who had never considered himself much of a dancer, found rhythm in Tessa's gentle guidance. They moved together as if they'd been partners for years, not months. During a break in the dancing, they stepped outside for air. The night was crisp, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. "I never properly thanked you," Morgan said suddenly. "For what? For staying. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." He turned to face her, moonlight silvering her features. "For seeing something worth salvaging in a man who'd lost everything." Tessa shook her head slowly. "You hadn't lost everything, Morgan, just money and a false friend. Your character, your skills, your heart, those remained intact." "My heart." He echoed. "Yes," she said softly. "A lesser man would have been bitter, vengeful. You chose to rebuild instead." Morgan took her gloved hand in his. "Because you showed me how." Their first kiss was tentative, a question asked and answered in the gentle press of lips. When they parted, Tessa's eyes remained closed for a moment, as if memorizing the sensation. "I've wanted to do that since the day you showed up at my cabin with your ledger book," Morgan admitted. Tessa laughed, the sound bright in the winter air. "And I've wanted you to since you calmed that stallion at the Sullivan farm." As they returned to the dance, hands linked, Morgan felt as if he'd struck gold again, a vein far richer than any Leland had stolen. February arrived with biting cold and the deadline for Duchess's training. Colonel Richardson came to inspect Morgan's progress, his skepticism evident as he watched Morgan lead the once untamable mare through a series of perfect maneuvers. "I don't believe it," the colonel said, shaking his head in amazement. "She's like a different animal." "Same animal, sir." "Just understood now." The colonel insisted on paying a bonus beyond the agreed-upon fee. "My daughter will be over the moon, and I'll be sending more horses your way, Quinn. You can count on that." As Morgan counted out the payment later that evening, he realized something extraordinary. His business was not just surviving, but thriving. In just 3 months, he had gone from destitute to debt-free, with prospects for continued growth. "We should celebrate," he told Tessa as she updated the ledgers with the new figures. "This success belongs to both of us." Tessa looked up, her pencil pausing mid-calculation. "Morgan, there's something I need to tell you." The serious tone in her voice made his stomach tighten. "What is it?" "I received a letter today from Pennsylvania." She set down her pencil. "My father has fallen ill. They're asking me to return home." The world seemed to tilt beneath Morgan's feet. "For how long? I don't know," she admitted. The letter wasn't specific about the nature of his illness, only that he's asking for me. Morgan fought against the surge of panic. Just when everything was coming together, the business, their relationship, it seemed fate, had another cruel twist in store. "When would you leave?" "The stage runs next Tuesday." Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her turmoil. "Morgan, I don't want to go, but he's my father." "Of course you must go," Morgan said immediately, though each word cost him. "Family comes first, always." In the week before her departure, they worked feverishly to organize the business so Morgan could manage alone. Tessa trained young Tommy in basic bookkeeping, while Morgan frantically memorized her system for tracking clients and payments. The night before she was to leave, they sat before the fire in Morgan's cabin, which had become their unofficial headquarters. Neither spoke much, the weight of impending separation too heavy for casual conversation. "I want you to have something," Morgan said finally, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small wooden box and placed it in Tessa's hand. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, lay a delicate silver necklace with a small pendant shaped like a horse. "Morgan, it's beautiful," Tessa whispered, touching the pendant reverently. "I had it made from part of the first payment for Duchess," he explained, "to remind you of what we built together." Tears welled in Tessa's eyes as she turned so he could fasten it around her neck. The pendant rested just below her collarbone, catching the firelight. "I'll come back," she promised, turning to face him. "As soon as I can." "I'll be here," he said simply, "building what we started." The stagecoach departure the next morning was a somber affair. Half the town turned out to bid farewell to their beloved schoolteacher, but Morgan stood apart from the crowd, his hat pulled low over his eyes. Just before boarding, Tessa broke away from the well-wishers and came to him, heedless of the watching eyes. "This isn't goodbye," she said fiercely. Morgan pulled her into his arms, propriety be damned. "No, it isn't. It's just until next time." Their kiss was both a promise and a farewell, interrupted only by the stagecoach driver's impatient call, and then she was gone, the coach disappearing in a cloud of dust down the road east. The weeks that followed tested Morgan's resolve. Running the business alone was exhausting, and each night he returned to his cabin only to find it emptier than before, despite its improved furnishings and comfort. Tommy proved a godsend, taking on more responsibilities with the horses as Morgan struggled with the bookkeeping. 2 more clients brought horses for training, and the territorial newspaper ran a feature on Quinn horse training that brought inquiries from as far as Wyoming and Idaho. Letters from Tessa arrived sporadically, each one devoured for news of her return. Her father's condition improved slowly, a heart ailment that required extended rest. In each letter, she reaffirmed her intention to return, but no firm date was set. March melted into April, and the hills around Bitterroot turned green with new life. Morgan expanded the corrals and hired a carpenter to begin work on a proper stable. The business was growing beyond what he had imagined possible in those dark days after Leland's betrayal. But success tasted hollow without Tessa to share it. One evening in late April, as Morgan sat at his table struggling with the monthly accounts, a knock came at the door. Expecting Tommy with news about a new foal, he called out irritably, "It's open." The door swung wide to reveal not Tommy but Tessa, travel-worn but smiling, a carpetbag in her hand and determination in her eyes. Morgan froze, certain he was imagining her. "Are you going to invite me in, Mr. Quinn, or have you forgotten your manners in my absence?" Her voice, that wonderful voice he'd heard only in his dreams for months, broke the spell. He crossed the room in 3 strides and swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. Her laughter, mingled with his own, filled the cabin with joy that had been absent too long. When he finally set her down, he couldn't stop touching her hair, her face, her hands, as if reassuring himself she was really there. "Your father?" he asked. "Recovering well," she said, "and quite insistent that I return to Montana when he learned what was waiting for me here." "And what exactly did you tell him was waiting?" Morgan asked, suddenly nervous. Tessa reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded paper. "I told him about our business, of course, and about this." Morgan took the paper, unfolding it to reveal a deed of transfer of ownership of the quarter section adjoining his property. "I don't understand," he said, scanning the document. "This says the land belongs to me." "To us," Tessa corrected. "I used my savings to purchase it, for the expansion." "Expansion? The business is growing, we need more space for the horses, and—" She hesitated. "For other things," Morgan's heart thundered in his chest. "What other things might those be, Miss Ainsley? Perhaps a proper house," she suggested, her voice soft but certain. "With room for a family someday." "Tessa," Morgan breathed, understanding dawning, "are you proposing to me?" Her laugh was bright with nervous energy. "I suppose I am, in my own way, unless you'd rather do the asking." Morgan took her hands in his. "I had planned to, before you left." "I was waiting for the right moment, and then ask me now," she interrupted. "I'm tired of waiting for the right moment, Morgan. Life is too unpredictable for that." Morgan dropped to one knee, still holding her hands in his. "Tessa Ainsley, you found me when I was broken and helped me rebuild. You believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. You stayed when it would have been easier to leave." His voice thickened with emotion. "I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Tessa's cheeks. "Yes, Morgan Quinn, 1,000 times yes." As they sealed their promise with a kiss, Morgan thought of how far they had come since that terrible day when he discovered Leland's betrayal. What had seemed like an ending had been merely the beginning of something far more precious than gold, a partnership built on trust, respect, and love that would endure long after mineral wealth had been spent. Outside, the Montana sunset painted the sky in hues of amber and rose, casting golden light across the land that would become their future, a future they would build together, one day at a time. 3 years later, Morgan stood on the porch of their newly completed house, watching as Tessa moved among the rose bushes she'd planted along the walkway. Their son, James, toddled behind her on sturdy legs, his chubby hands reaching for the colorful blooms. The business had prospered beyond their wildest dreams. Quinn horse training now occupied 5 acres, with a proper stable, training rings, and paddocks for the various horses in their care. They'd hired 3 full-time hands, including Tommy, who'd shown such aptitude that Morgan was grooming him for partnership when he came of age. Life wasn't perfect, no life ever is, but it was rich with purpose and love. Sometimes on quiet evenings, Morgan would think about Leland and the gold he'd stolen. It seemed like a small price to pay for the treasures he'd found instead. "What are you thinking about, looking so serious?" Tessa asked, climbing the porch steps with James on her hip. At 3 years old, he was the image of his father, with the same thoughtful blue eyes and determined chin. Morgan smiled, taking his son and kissing his wife in one smooth motion. I was thinking about how losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to me. Tessa raised an eyebrow. Because it brought you to me. Because it taught me what truly matters, Morgan corrected, shifting James to his shoulder. Gold can be stolen. A good name, earned respect, true partnership, these are the real wealth. As they stood together, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, a natural treasure that could be appreciated, but never possessed, Morgan Quinn knew with absolute certainty that he was the richest man in Montana territory, not despite his losses, but because of them.